The male imagination requires inspiration, and our teachers need to work with, not against, the kinetic energy of boys. And we need to bring back recess. And we need a savior at schools, like to just get out of that classroom and play sports or run around or get beaten up or all of the things that happens to boys.
Hello everybody, you're listening to Chatting with Candice. I'm your host, Candice Horback. Before we get started on this week's episode, if you want to support the podcast, you can go to chattingwithcandice.com, and from there you can sign up for our Patreon account where you get early access to episodes and shout outs, plus some cool merch, or you can click that little link that says Buy Me Coffee. Both things help me out a ton. I'm just getting started. Every dollar makes a difference. I recently started using Amura CBD and I am blown away by the quality. So they actually deliver flower CBD right to your door, and it is the only heat not burn device that honors the integrity of the flower. So what that means is it doesn't get so hot. It's a lot more gentle on your lungs. You're not going to have a ton of crazy vapor coming out when you exhale. It's a much more enjoyable process with really quality CBD. And what I love is that they include these little cardstocks in the box that break down the exact chemical makeup of the CBD, and they even note like the tasting notes, which for someone like me, and I love food and I love wine, I found to be very fun and helpful. So if you want to save 15%, you can go to amuracbd.com, that's OMURACBD.com, and use code CANDICE for 15% off. Again, that's amuracbd.com, code CANDICE, and I will include the affiliate link and the coupon code in the show notes. This week, I would like to give a shout out to Taylor Mims. Thank you so much for being a Patreon. I really appreciate your support. Now that we got all of those plugs out of the way, please help me welcome Greg Ellis. Yeah, we might cause a stir, but I don't think that you mind, given your Twitter account.
Oh, God.
I know. I've been watching some of your YouTube videos because I like to try to feel like I know the person before, especially because everything's it's virtual now. Like if we were in person, I feel like you could riff a lot more naturally, but you don't have that connection. So I try to get it myself prior. And you have some pretty provocative titles for your YouTube. Like the one that I was just watching was Abuse Has No Gender. And it had a really powerful clip in the beginning. It was, this woman that was berating this man in public, and people were was that real, real footage, by actors?
Well, there were only two actors, the man and the woman.
Yeah.
Everyone else was general public. So what I found about that, I've been talking with Mark Brooks, who got an OBE for charity work, and he runs the Mankind Initiative in England. Mm-hmm. And he actually shared it with me. And I thought it was just a powerful cold open to have because, and the Abuse Has No Gender came from, I've been talking with Johnny Depp and his team, and his attorney wrote to me, The Truth Has No Gender. And then the Depp Heads, who are the supporters of Johnny Depp, changed it to Abuse Has No Gender. And I think it speaks to that. And we can talk about it as well, the expendability of men in our society and how, men aren't important. Let's just smash father figures everywhere. The very idea of men is bad.
So there's so much. I urge everyone that's listening to watch this video. To me, the most powerful part wasn't the actors. It was everyone reacting to the actors. You saw people laughing or just blatantly ignoring it. And the first thing I thought of is if this was reversed, this would be very different. If this man was berating this woman even half as hard as she was to him, people would have intervened. They certainly wouldn't be laughing. And I feel so I come from a pretty abused background. It was all in my family growing up, on both ends, dad and mom, and mom's boyfriends and all of this thing. And I mean, my mom in some cases gave it worse than she got, and that's not to victim blame and blah 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 blah. I feel like you always have to do those disclosures, but I've firsthand seen women at their worst, and to say that men don't deserve protection or they don't deserve the same it's a little bit discouraging, especially as like a mom of a young boy. I'm like, I don't want him to grow up in this world. The statistic that you shared was 40% of men are actually victims of abuse, and most people would laugh at that, and it's not like a laughable matter. So I loved that you did that video.
Well, thank you. It was, the it's basically two. For those who haven't seen it, it's basically two. A male and a female, and the first half of the video is the man berating the woman and verbally assaulting her, and then physically grabbing her and pushing her up against the fence near a park. And you can see the public reaction is understandably people step in, particularly women, and they call on the man to stop, and they call him out, and as they should. And then the same scene is filmed, but with reverse, with the woman attacking the man. And the reactions, which are all natural from the general public, are just laughter and derision, like it's pathetic. How pathetic is the man? And so I think it's difficult sometimes to kind of pair that traditional chivalrous stoic masculinity with this new kind of modern masculinity of we have to be more understanding and feeling and encourage, as we should, encourage women to go out and into the workplace and have equality. And so it was very interesting seeing just a natural reaction. I think that speaks to how our discourse, our public discourse is right now with regards to men, and how it's been for a few years in terms of smashing the patriarchy and all men bad and believe all women. And I think we need men too in the conversation. I think, we need to start being a bit more positive, and how we can talk to the greater characteristics of men, the more general characteristics, because there are some that I think men move physically towards violence quicker than women do. Mm-hmm. Men are violent with their fists, whereas women scratch with their nails. And there are fundamental differences, but there's also individual differences. So that's what interests me.
So I was listening to one of your podcasts that you were a guest on, and one of the hosts was saying how brave she thought you were, and like she almost didn't want to say like men's rights, and like that's like a bad word. I'm like, what do you mean though? So we're, like you mentioned, we're completely leaving out like 50% of the population because we just assume that you guys don't matter. And that's been an acceptable narrative, especially in like this post Me Too era. So do you want to kind of give the listeners your background of what got you inspired to kind of start using your platform, start using your voice for what people would say is very noble and very brave and very cancelable, if that's even a word, to speak out for men's rights?
Yeah, I think much of what I've seen I've recently learned the term MRA, men's rights activists. I don't consider myself a men's rights activist, more of a gender equity advocate for family, fatherhood, and men too. And I think, as humans, we're sense makers and meaning seekers. And I think we have a crisis of meaning right now in society. And having looked at this through multiple lenses, I think the breakdown of the family is the single biggest civilizational catastrophe we're facing today. I think the gravest indicator at the root of America's torn familial tapestry is marriage and family breakdown. Social ills and public policy stem from the health and well-being of relationships and family formation. Yet these days, our society seems to undervalue the importance of the family unit. I read David Brooks in The Atlantic, his article last year, where he said that the family unit was a mistake. I see movements like BLM on their website, and they have, they want to get rid of men in the family unit. And to talk about the significant role a father plays in the developing minds of particularly young boys, because I have two sons, and the recent such negative messaging about masculinity and the patriarchy and men in general being vilified. It's no wonder that our younger generation of boys and younger men are suffering at school and at play. And I think with our current education system failing our boys, and having witnessed that firsthand, and realizing just how, for want of a better word, toxic the atmosphere and the environment is to discuss this, I looked out there and I saw the few people that were discussing it were women. And the odd man who was canceled pretty quickly. for demonizing mothers and women. And I don't think demonizing masculinity is the solution. I think that's the problem. And so, I decided that I would, rather than just complaining to friends and talking about it in small groups and having conversations wherever, on the golf course or in the pub or at work, to just form a project that would be a kind of multimedia conversation and a lens to which I could talk through and maybe create some entertaining media, perhaps, on what is a difficult subject and has many different topics within it.
So when you see these articles that are being written or these agendas that are that were on the website for BLM, which is to abolish the nuclear family and smash the patriarch, all of these like catchy phrases, do you think that people really want that, or is it just like so radical that they want eyeballs? Because to me, like, that's wildly radical to assume that women can just raise kids on their own and it's going to be the exact same as if they had a supportive partner.
I think many of us don't take the time to actually invest. Many of us don't have the time to investigate and get better educated. I know when I first heard of that particular movement, I decided, rather than jumping on the bandwagon, and of course the cause is a good cause. Of course, Black Lives Matter. And to suggest that they don't is ludicrous, and we need to call out people who don't believe that. But a movement sometimes can get hijacked along the way, and we can be a little ignorant of what the main goals, the doctrine, the purposes of that movement are. So I think within me, being an individual, it's up to me and incumbent upon me to explore and see what they're actually trying to change and what that is. And I just don't agree with that. I don't profess to be some kind of, hardcore family values champion that wanders around with posters saying family values. But I do think when we look at society, there are certain bigger themes, macro themes that are affecting, and the trickle down effect of how we're behaving, how we're feeling, our emotions, and taking the time to investigate that and form one's own opinion based on it, which is very difficult these days because a lot of the news is, so, it's propaganda, it's either far left or it's far right. And being more moderate means you're not going to scream as loudly as everyone else and be heard in the screeching pack. So I just encourage people, like I do myself, is to just try and get more educated on subjects. If someone's written an article, who is it? Why have they written it? What are they trying to say? What's the nuance? Maybe leave a little room for doubt. So, yeah.
So in that article that was in the Atlantic, and they were talking about getting rid of the traditional family, like what was the argument for that? Like what were the advantages that you were going to gain from that?
Well, I think it was talking about David Brooks. Maybe the point he was making when he said it was a mistake was to move more towards a more collective society where we could, and I get the idea behind that. We're actually not just thinking about our nuclear family unit and who is under our household. It's like, maybe we can think about the homeless guy who lives down the street that we see every time we walk.
Okay.
So I think that was the theme of it. But it just came at a time, and also I didn't agree with what he said. And there's the other thing. I can disagree with David Brooks. Doesn't mean he's a terrible person. He's actually a writer, way better than I could ever dream to be. But I think that misses the point and is too simplistic to say, I think we can do both. I think we can value marriage and family and our relationships. And when I say the family, it's the familial as well, the interpersonal relationships we have. They're important because we all had breakdowns in our friendships and relationships. And that's life. It's rupture and repair. It's push and pull, and how we can be less reactive and more responsible and look at self rather than other, I think, is important.
Huge.
Just own responsibility and go, you know what? I accept the part that I played in this particular rupture. How can I repair it? How could I have done better? Tomorrow I vow to make better mistakes. Which mistake can I correct and try and improve on?
That's one of your original quotes, right?
Yeah, I wrote a little pocket oracle of philosophical quotes called "No Thing in Between." And one of the quotes was, "Tomorrow I vow to make better mistakes."
I love that one. I've heard you say it a couple times, and I'm like, that's like such a simple and attainable goal. Like everyone can try to do like 1% improvements every day, right? And it's just like not saying you're not going to make a mistake or that you're not going to fuck up. Like that's guaranteed, and that's, you know, you have to accept that, but hopefully it's not as bad as the one that you did yesterday. So I think that's really, really cool.
Thank you. And if it's the same, you know, it's acknowledging as well, you know what, I'm going to keep making mistakes. I'm flawed human. We do F up. We do, you know, we transgress. And sometimes we don't even know it. Right. People are upset with us and we go, "Oh, I didn't even know you're upset." Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. Just everyone's like reactions. Like you used to be able to say you did something that hurt my feelings and have a conversation about it, or you used to have opposing opinions and have a conversation about it. And now it's, if you offended me, like we're mortal enemies, or if you don't align with me exactly down the line, we're mortal enemies. And then I feel like with everything happening with COVID, and you mentioned a lack of purpose, like all of these kind of interlace together. It's like the less we have going on for ourselves, the more we focus on other people, like especially in times of disparity. So if we lost our jobs or we haven't seen loved ones, rather than like look introspectively and try to get yourself out of like this dark place, you start looking at everything wrong in the world and other people. Do you think that there's a correlation between that and I guess like the decline of marriages, or like the thought that you need a partner? Because I see like so many, especially women, that are like, I'm this strong, independent woman and I don't need a man and I can do everything by myself. And I think some along that way, we're losing purpose and getting angrier, if that makes sense. I know that I kind of was drawn out on that. But what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think the devaluation of men, of fathers, of boys, particularly boys. I mean, that's an area that I think is of real interest for me. That devaluation of the very idea of men is something that, you know, men have been boys and boys will become men. So how can we have this conversation and talk about these difficult subjects that do deal with things like you started off by talking about trauma and our family of origin and dysfunctional family systems. And, you know, I think everyone deals with a certain level of trauma. And trauma resides in the body, and the body keeps the score, and the organism is carrying that weight of trauma around, and life is remembered backwards and lived forward. So you know, what is the definition of feeling and emotion, and how can we make sense? We are sense makers of that trauma that we carry in those situations, and maybe rewrite the script that we tell ourselves, or the predominant script, whether it's, you know, of our childhoods or our past, if you will. There are many different versions of ourselves. So when I think about boys, I think about our education system. You know, our education system is massively, I think it's failing children in general, but I particularly think it's failing boys. And with that, an extra burden is placed on fathers, on men, on masculinity to pick up the slack with much more immediate remedial interventions to help stem our boy crisis. And that general lack of motivation being instilled in our younger generations of boys by an educational system that's not paying much attention to what boys need is disturbing. And, you know, I look at the 5 factors driving this growing epidemic of unmotivated boys and underachieving young men, which are video games, prescription drugs, environmental toxins, the devaluation of masculinity, and teaching methods. And I mean, you look at teaching methods in our schools, boys need motivational curriculums. And when I look at the biggest proponent of why the people who are fighting the hardest to stop curriculums evolving or devolving curriculums to be less motivational for boys, it's, you know, frankly, radical, postmodern, progressive feminists. Toxic, some would say, not the true equality feminists. I mean, I've had many feminists on my show. You know, there are some amazing women who've been fighting, you know, for equal rights for women for decades. Christina Hoff Sommers, I think she's called the factual feminist, Camille Paglia. There's so many of them, but it's the rabid strain of misandrist feminists, I think, that really don't want boys to do well. And I think our younger generations of young men are failing because we're not mentoring, shepherding, guiding, teaching, and better educating our boys to become more responsible.
So as a parent of two boys, because I have a 1-year-old, so we're not even in the education system yet, and that's some territory that I'm very scared to navigate and very ignorant as well at this point, just because of lack of exposure. Like, what do you look for to make sure that they have a positive experience in school and that they're not falling behind? Because you do see that now in the universities, right? Like, women are far surpassing and outperforming men as far as like attaining degrees. And it was almost like we wanted to get women to a place where we could go to school, right? And we could go to university. And that was awesome. But then there was like almost an overcorrection that happened. And I feel like we do that in a lot of areas, right? Like we tend to see something that went wrong and then we overcorrect. And then we need to kind of like steering a boat. Like you have to kind of take it easy to find like a nice steady way like forward instead of like these hard turns that we're doing. So if you have a young boy, like, how do you make sure that he succeeds? Like, what do you look for in the education system?
Gosh, that's a really good question. Really good analogy too. Gentling the moves rather than the quick stormy turns. Gosh, what do you look for? I don't know. I remember what I looked for my boys was a more structured school. I guess more like the British school that I didn't have, and I regret doing that. I think boys, I remember my youngest, when he was maybe 6, he came home from school, and I was checked in with my boys after school, and I said to him, how was your day? And he said, I just feel like a bird trapped in a cage. I said, what do you mean, son? He said, well, I want to be out playing. He's got all this kinetic energy, and he's being told to sit down, shut up, behave. Well, when I was 5 or 6, I didn't know how to behave. Someone just telling me to behave. And I think the bigger themes as well with at schools, I hear a lot of us telling children what to think rather than teaching them how to think. My eldest did English lit class, and he was given a book, and he read the book, and his interpretation of the book was different to his female teacher. But she graded him down, like it was a terrible grade. And it was a great book report. It was a really interesting interpretation of how he saw the story. And he went to speak, because I've always empowered them to have a voice and speak up. So he went to speak to the teacher, and he was just kind of chastised and made to feel devalued and that he got it wrong. And it's that rigid way of teaching that I think is difficult. That's not to say that teachers don't have a hard time, but I think about books and the importance of reading. I mean, that's one thing I say to friends of mine who have little kids. Keep your kids off devices as long as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Our device dependency, chemical imbalances because of the dopamine hits. It's difficult because of peer pressure, but really try and focus as a parent on what is the best school for your kid rather than the best school for you, or what's the fanciest or greatest schools. There are some real gems out there that maybe aren't right at the top. And just go into the library if they have a library, or what books are in the classroom. You'll get a quick education on what the school is all about. And I think the school of life says reading is a form of therapy, a way of processing our own thoughts through the medium of others or the other's words. And books make sense of our experience. And through simplification and empathy, they bring clarity to situations and states of mind that we ourselves are familiar with, yet perhaps thus far have lacked the means to analyze or make sense of. And in the best of them, we find ourselves made comprehensible for the first time. They speak not only to their own age, but to all ages. So I think boys aren't being given boy-centric books at school, full stop. Boys will read if they're given materials that interest them. The male imagination requires inspiration, and our teachers need to work with, not against, the kinetic energy of boys. And we need to bring back recess. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
my savior at school is like to just get out of that classroom and play sports or run around or get beaten up or all of the things that happens to boys.
Mm-hmm.
In recent years, we've lost 50% of boys' unstructured playtime.
I heard, I can't remember where I was listening to this, but I heard that one of the main reasons they got rid of recess was because they were scared of abductions. Have you heard that?
I haven't heard that, no.
Yeah, it was like some dated, like back when it was like it's 7 p.m. Do you know where your kids are? Did you ever see those commercials?
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Northern England in the 70s and 80s, and it was when our street, all of the parents knew each other. We were all playing as kids out on the street, and when it started to get dark, whatever that time was, it was time to go home, and we knew time to go home. But I remember when I think I was maybe 7 years old playing with the kids in the daytime, and this guy drove up in a car and he wanted directions. And I was just young and naive and I wanted to be helpful. And I remember, oh, it's down the street and you go turn right on the Kenilworth Road. And he said, oh, can you help me? Can you show me? I'll drop you back off. And I was sure. And before I thought about it, I got in the car with him.
Oh my God.
That 2 minutes, because he was clearly not a good person.
Right.
When he put his hand on my knee and I'd asked him to get out of the car and I felt trapped and I looked in the mirror and I'm driving away and my friends are just standing there. That is a worry, it really is a genuine worry, but that's not a reason why we should stop boys having recess and playtime. And sure, if you live in an area and that school is in an area where it's more prone to, where the faculty think that there might be some abductions, fair enough, get some extra security. But I don't know if we want to be reducing recess and playtime for boys because we're afraid of abductions.
Yeah, and it's all fenced here too for them. Like I've never seen a school that didn't have a gate around it. So it had the proper administrators like watching the children like you're supposed to be doing, and it shouldn't be a problem. And I think there's also probably a little bit of fear around like kids getting hurt, and they're like, well, what if someone roughhouses, which is like, it's normal kid behavior. And I think we tend to it goes back to like overreacting and overcorrecting. So it's like maybe they get into a little scuffle and then one parent wants the other one's expelled. And we kind of have to allow for just like human behavior. It's going to be like a bad analogy, but like, at the dog parks when you take your dog there and they have to, like, all the ones that are already there run up to the new dog and they're all sniffing and puffing up and barking, and they just have to like kind of like sort it out themselves and then they can go play. I feel like it's kind of the same on the recess court, right? Like the kids kind of have to like feel each other out and see where I belong in this herd. And that's totally okay. That's different than like bullying, right? It's very different. But we have like this sense of just being so fragile, and then we can't allow anything to happen. Like you can't have a snowball fight. You can't play dodgeball anymore. Like all of these things are banned. And I don't know. I feel like we're making like a bunch of just more fragile, less realistic adults when they grow up, right? Like the world's not easy.
You talk about roughhousing. Roughhousing is a vital experience for boys, and dads help navigate this so the child learns healthy boundaries. That's one of the main gateways to learning healthy boundaries. Roughhousing engenders a sense of empathy to self and other, and means the boy is much more likely to have friends and less likely to become depressed and withdrawn. You know where the limit to that boundary is when you're roughhousing and someone gets hurt. Ow! Oh, you do. It's a rare boy who hears and then goes in for the kill.
Right. Then you might want to look into that.
Well, I mean, it's not as common as one might think, or
right.
Maybe, I don't know. And dad style parenting as well. I mean, I hear a lot about single parent families and deadbeat dads, and we have a legal system right now that is encouraging the breakdown of the family. And I had Heather McDonald, who I think Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General of the US, a couple of years ago, called the greatest criminal thinking mind alive in America today. And I told her before she came on the show, she asked, what are we going to talk about? I said, family law, family law, family law, family law. And then I asked the first two questions I asked. It was, well, that's not my area of expertise. And I said, are you aware that there isn't a presumption of innocence in family law, that family law is not answerable to the Supreme Court? We have a draconian law, a judicial branch of the law. that basically there is no presumption of innocence. So if, quote unquote, the greatest criminal thinking mind alive in America today isn't aware and isn't prepared to talk about why there isn't a presumption of innocence in family law that for both parents, men and women, mothers and fathers, and why that is the case might be because of the $60 billion a year industry within family law that wants to continue and is incentivized to break down the family unit. But anyway, getting back to, for a moment, roughhousing, yes, dad-style parenting, guiding boys through disciplined experience is a necessary component in balancing the psyche of young males, and instills a learned sense of agency. Mm-hmm. You know, it helps the child self-integrate a more healthy value system. So I believe as a society, we really need to ask ourselves some difficult questions about the ever diminishing valuation we're placing on fatherhood and family. This isn't a one side against the other. It's not a zero-sum game. It can be a win-win. And mothers and fathers and brothers and daughters and sons and sisters and uncles, we're all invested in that, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. No, you articulated that the best that I've heard when it comes to like rough and tumble play, because I've always known that it's important, especially for boys, but I never really understood how that translates. And like you really hit that on the head. One of my favorite stories that my husband's told me about, like when he was growing up with his dad. So like they would always like have wrestling matches at night. Like it was just like part of their post-dinner routine. And one of the times they were wrestling, he must have been like 5, I think he said. He was really young. And he decided to bite his dad during the wrestling match. So he just bit down really hard and his dad just screamed. And all of a sudden he like said he looked back and he had this like utter look of fear in his face, like, what have I done? And his dad was like, we do not bite. So it was like that hard boundary, right? It was like, this is where I draw the line as far as like interaction, and you learn a lot from each other in that moment. And obviously it imprinted on him, because now even in his late 30s, he's still remembering this moment, and as a fond one. Like it's a really funny story every time he like tells it. But yeah, I love that. I think it's so important. And I mean, I'm not going to do that. I mean, my baby's like 1 and I'm already like getting tired when I'm, you know, throwing him around and everything. It's like not my MO. So yeah, I've never heard it put that way, but I think that was great.
Thank you. No, I mean, it makes me chuckle thinking about, I'm sure it wasn't for his dad at the time. You know, that yelp, I mean, he learned there's the limit.
Mm-hmm. Teachable moment.
Not right, the teachable moment. There's the limit, there's the boundary. And also I think when we're roughhousing and when we need to, I think with boys, with my sons, it was about postponement gratification as well. Like, we have tasks to complete. How do we routinize through the tasks? Yes, I get it. I was bored at school. I didn't like school. There were so many more teachers that didn't inspire me than did inspire me. But we have to kind of be responsible to our tasking. And then when we're done with it, whatever the time is, whatever the goal is or the tasks are, then we can really enjoy ourselves. Mm-hmm. Then we got our free time, rather than the other way around, which is procrastinate. I'll have some fun. I'll get to it later, which is kind of what I did when I was a boy. Get to it because I didn't have someone around to teach me all of that. I had to learn all of that. Self-taught, you know, as an autodidact.
Mm-hmm. So we see the numbers and like the impact that it has to not have a father in the picture, right? And I don't understand when you see the impact negatively on mental health with these boys that turn into men, and the rate of their dropping out of school, and drug use, homelessness, like all of these things go through the roof if there's just a mother in the house. And then you have this industry that is feeding off of this. So its purpose is to make sure that this happens. Like, how do you even begin to tackle that? Like, you have quite the undertaking that you're doing, right? Like,
yeah, it is an undertaking. We talk about boys, we talk about fathers, we talk about family. So boys, you know, when the testosterone in boys is not channeled well, they become destructive. Mm-hmm. Aren't present in the family home to instruct, boys destruct. Testosterone is not channeled well, if testosterone is channeled well, boys become constructive. So how do we keep, or at least give families and men and fathers and families in general and mothers a better chance at keeping the family unit together? Well, that's a huge question. I don't know the answer to that, and I probably could posit some suggestions, but given the time that we have, I looked at it and I thought, where are we going wrong? And I think family law is where we're going wrong. If we have a branch of the legal system that basically is saying that's institutionalized as well, not aside from the lack of presumption of innocence. If criminals get a presumption of innocence and more rights than our children get, because it's not just about fathers and mothers in family. There's no presumption of innocence, and there's no shared equal parenting time, et cetera, et cetera. It's our children's basic human rights that are being violated. And we're propagating a system that breaks up the family. So I think there's many aspects, Candice, to this. I talked recently about the great awokening of the 2010s. Ushered in an age of unreason, an era of cancel culture where victimhood became the new currency and its economy is booming. I think we also live in a culture where people stand for what they hate, what they stand against, what they love and stand for. And I love and stand for family, fatherhood, family units, men too, mothers, brothers, sisters, wives, all of that. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a men's rights activist. I'm more of a gender equity advocate for family, fatherhood, and men too, and children. I think kids matter. Children are vital. They don't have rights. They can't defend themselves and protect themselves if they don't have advocates speaking for them and on their behalf. And the answer is not to smash the matriarchy or virtue signal toxic masculinity. I think it's empowering messages of tonic masculinity, positive masculinity. Not all men bad, but some men bad and some men bad, and vice versa. Advocating fatherhood is not about diminishing motherhood. So the statistics on men, just to share a few with you, when I found these out, I was just blown away because it speaks to how expendable men and fathers have become in our collective conversation in society. 80% of homeless are men. 93% of workplace deaths are men. Men kill themselves 400% more than women. 98% of war fatalities are men. Today, 1 in 3 American kids live without their biological father in the home. Divorced men kill themselves 8 times more than women every day in America. 10 divorced men kill themselves. And that's not to even talk about the men who are trapped and fathers who are trapped and kids and women and mothers who are trapped in the purgatory of family law, where there is no escape because of really one main lobbying group, and that's the attorneys. These attorneys in family law who write the laws and the playbook for family law, and they run the state bar associations. And as I said, it's nearly a $60 billion a year industry. So they are getting rich off over the deaths of, and it's not an overstatement to say they are encouraging the state, and the legal system is kidnapping our children and murdering our families and stealing our liberties and our freedoms. And I think there are probably a few root causes that I look to, and that's divorce is one, but suicide is another, and social isolation is another. So I talk about suicide skyrocketing. 800,000 people die by suicide every year, 132 suicides every day. That's one person every 40 seconds. And with the disparity in statistics of more men, that's not to say I devalue or it's less important that women are taking their own lives as well. But with those statistics in mind, male mental health is a real concern. And nothing tells the story of what fathers are facing more starkly than suicide statistics. And with the social isolation of COVID-19 and really damaging public health messages, corroding our collective well-being, with social distancing being encouraged, it should be discouraged. It should be encouraging social connectedness and talking about physical distancing. I think families need lifelines, and many fathers and children and mothers as well are on life support. So how we talk about that, those very difficult topics is vital.
So when I first got interested in this space, I saw this like viral video. I'm sure you know, like Marilyn York. Have you heard of
Yeah,
her?
Marilyn came on The Respondent. I think she's episode 9 of The Respondent.
Oh, I'll have to check that out. Yeah, I love her. I'm actually trying to get her on the podcast too. And her TED Talk was like shattering, like just what she was talking about, like how men are treated, like even down to the line of questioning in the courts. Like they'll ask, who's the teacher, like all of these things that, the mom or the stay-at-home mom would know, but they're not asking like these deeper questions that are like, well, what's your kid's favorite superhero, right? Things that actually show that you do know and give a shit about your kid. Like the questions that they ask are almost designed to make the dad look like he's absentee or aloof or too interested in work. So that's why they're obviously better with the mom. And then the kids obviously don't get a say, right? Like when my parents were going through a divorce, like no one asked me what arrangement would suit me. I could tell you right now, it's not every other weekend or just the summers. Like that wasn't beneficial for me growing up. Yeah, the whole thing kind of needs to be overturned. And then you were talking about like a certain law that was like dads can get a felony for kidnapping their kid, and then a mom doesn't. It's not a felony if the mom
Yeah.
does it.
Well,
And I was
first of
like,
all, forgive me. Yeah, Marilyn York I reached out to her because when I read about her and found out that she owns a family law practice in Nevada. She has a wonderful TED Talk. I think it's had a couple of million views. And she switched her law firm to, it's female only employed, and she only represents men because she saw the bias in family law and she saw how men were being treated and fathers were being treated. And I think the one you were referring to was paternity laws. Our ambivalence to the importance of fatherhood is probably best exemplified by the instruments society has put in place to prevent men from taking on their rightful role and participating in fatherhood in the first place. And this is paternity laws. When you consider the fact that currently it's an accepted fixture of modern Western society and perfectly legal in just about every region in the Western world for a mother to conceal from a biological father that he is a father at all, a mother can give birth without even communicating a thing about it. It goes even further. A mother can knowingly or mistakenly drop another man's name onto the birth certificate. And even if after a few years, a paternity test scientifically overturns the mistake or the lie, the biological father can't reverse this manufactured reality and gain his rightful status as the true father. He has no right to see a photo of his child, ever. And wow. A child grows up not knowing their biological father. That to me, when I found that out, when Marilyn and I talked about that, it just floored me. It's like, it's basically, that's kidnapping. If we're pushing for equality and we want true equality, and I'm about equity or equality of opportunity, not equity or equality of outcome, and there is a difference. We have to be consistent, and of course there are exceptions to this, but this reality of how the legal system favors the matriarch over the patriarch, even in paternity laws, is astonishing. And for me, it's vital that we at least begin to have this conversation and talk more about it. And sometimes you talked about your situation, about no one asked you. Well, sometimes we do need to talk to our children. The courts aren't equipped to really extract. It's very cold. The courts are there to basically rule on law, and I think we have to find ways to keep parents out of court, out of the system of law, particularly given that it's a system that doesn't have a presumption of innocence. So how we do that when the mediation, the mediation industry in family law is corrupt as well. They're all attorneys and judges and retired judges, and it's just a cash cow. And we're putting money over kids, and that's despicable and deplorable. And we really need to call it out. We need to call out when people are making great decisions, but we also need to call out this system that puts money over families' well-being and particularly children's basic human rights to have access to both parents. And sometimes kids don't know if they're young. Sometimes kids don't know what's best for them. But frankly, it's the parents who should know what's best for them. Not one parent, and then we disregard the other. Both parents, and how we find ways and models to help parents stay out of court, stay out of corrupt mediation when it is corrupt, because much of it is, and it's money making, and find more cost-effective ways to tend to people's interpersonal relating skills when it gets to crisis point, and maybe offer ways that can either help people tend so that they stay together, or break up less catastrophically, and keep the money in the estate of the family, what little or what large amount there is, rather than put it into the hands of the attorneys who are really, frankly, just propagating this system, incentivized to make money over kids and people's tragedy and crisis and trauma.
So in California, if you seek out a divorce, can you just get what's the process? Can you just get divorced?
Well, I think if two people communicate and go, let's get divorced, yeah, sure, you can decide to end your union, but ultimately you can't. Here's the thing that's paradoxical: legally, you can't go to one law firm and get them to do it. You have to each have a separate attorney. I wonder why that is. Because there's a zero-sum game involved, and immediately right away you have two legal buffers and two retainers, and they're pitting people against each other. So yeah, I think that anyone can end a union and find a way to stay out of the legal system, but at some point there has to be a legal paper that says you're divorced. So you're going to have to speak to someone who is skilled in divorce and disillusionment of divorce. And in California, it's such a cash cow industry.
Yeah, that's where my parents got their divorce, and I feel like it was pretty fast, but I was so young, I don't know. In North Carolina, which is where I'm at now, once you file for separation, you have to wait 12 months before you can actually be divorced. And I think, and I could be wrong, but I think the reason is because they're trying to fix the marriage. They want you to put in the effort before you're like, we're just done. Like, they want it to be a little bit more difficult, which I think can be a very good thing, assuming that there's no like violence or anything, crazy like that happening. But I was curious if it was a lot faster in other more like liberal states, because I feel like it is.
Yeah, maybe it is. In my experience, it isn't. And I admire the fact that, let's have a cooling off period. But ultimately, what about those people who just want to be done and get on with their lives? You can bifurcate your possessions, and you can do the legal documents later. But I think we have to come up with better solutions in terms of what models are we using, and how are we going to help people in the intermediate to keep them out of court, to keep them out of arbitration and mediation and this system of corruption that's just a money-making machine, and say, look, there's people like Stan Posthumous, who has the Beyond Win-Win model of mediation. I think he was a mediator who was in the system and saw that it was all just, retired attorneys or retired judges, and it was that kind of retirement fund to make money off churning people within mediation and churning people within the legal system and throwing them back in one compartment to the next. So there are people out there who have been working at this, and I'm trying to bring together a kind of coalition and a movement of people with a view to eventually getting policy change. And really, for me, the biggest, there are so many issues to tackle, parental alienation, 50-50 shared parenting, which we could talk about. Why that hasn't been pushed through is astonishing. But ultimately, the top tier is the presumption of innocence. How we don't have a presumption of innocence in family law is stunning to me. And the equal shared parenting, there's been moves for the last 20 plus years, I've found out, to get a default shared parenting that says, it's a starting point that says 50-50. So if there's any disagreement, there's no mudslinging, it's 50-50. And that's honoring the basic children's human rights And if one parent wants to have more parenting time than the other, or feels like the other parent doesn't deserve as much as them, they have to make the argument in court. A judge will listen, and they'll be afforded more parenting time. But we don't have that.
Why is that not the standard? Like, how did we get to a place where, because I know initially it was the mom always gets the kid. Like, that was just expected and decided. So, like, where did that come from, and how come we haven't evolved to more modern times where both parents need to be present?
Yeah, I think in 1960, 8% of children lived in a home with only their biological mother. And now today, more than 20, with only their biological, now more than 23% who do. So the no-fault divorce laws that came in the 70s, that has a lot to do with it. It was well-intentioned, but as is usually the case, the legal system needs reformation, or it needs a little bit of tending to, and it needs to evolve and be improved. And there are aspects to this system that are just so corrupt. I mean, my book, which is coming out later this year, The Respondent, I expose the cartel of family law. I call it family law war because it is a war of family. It's family law and the family system. When people get divorced, the kids, it's two families from the mother and father who came together. And if there is disillusion and an alienation or an erasure of a parent, then that parent's entire family of origin can be alienated to what is oftentimes, their nieces, nephews, grandchildren. And that's extremely painful, and we're just compounding the trauma. But when I looked at the default shared parenting, the 50-50 presumption of baseline shared parenting, it's been tried in multiple states. And the only state that I am aware of that it's passed in is Kentucky. And that was passed there because it's apparently illegal for divorce lawyer lobby groups of family law attorneys to lobby state legislatures. So they weren't able to buy off keeping the status quo as is, and the horrific situation that's going on for families. Everywhere else, I mean, Arizona, they passed something, I think, a couple of years ago in their legislature, but it said, I think the wording was maximum. So in time, and it didn't take long before the attorneys worked their way around how to get around what does maximum even mean? Maximum could mean a second if we're dealing in milliseconds, or it could mean 10 years if we're dealing with a decade. So how we bring these subjects to light in the media, but also how the laws are worded, how the bills are worded, and the specific legalese that's used is so vital, because we can fix this. We can come together. I think this is a universal issue. I haven't heard someone put an argument yet that I go, oh my God, yes, you're right. That's why we shouldn't do this. In every conceivable way. I was speaking with someone who's been working in this field for the last 30 years the other day, and talking about philanthropy and giving to good causes. And he said, forget about children's hospitals, forget about cancer charities, forget about breast cancer, forget about all of it. Everything has to go into fixing family law, because if we fix that, then the residual effect of psychological and physical well-being will be just exponentially improved on so many levels, and financially, the healthcare system, the insurance, I mean, it just goes on. So
I don't think that's a crazy statement. So you mentioned, and you've mentioned this in other podcasts, The Body Keeps Score, which I've read a while ago. And I thought it was really cool that you love that book. But for people that haven't read it, essentially, it's like these stressors and these traumas can actually show up as like physical health ailments, right? And even, I can't remember if it was that book or another one, but even like through your lineage, right? So like through epigenetics, so traumas that your mother has gone through also have an impact on you and your physical being. And I know some people think that this sounds woo-woo, but there's a lot of like serious science behind it. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
What do you mean?
woo like mysticism or like too spiritual or magical. Yeah, like not scientific based, but there actually is a lot of science going behind this. So if you alleviate this massive stressor of these parents, essentially, like you said, going to war, that's going to have a huge ripple effect even down the line. So I think that's really cool. And I don't know if anyone's ever made that connection.
Well, you just did, and I appreciate it because, you know, the woo-woo in the or the right brain, as I call it, the mysticism. Like I remember seeing Serena McGilchrist gave this talk about the left brain hemisphere and the right brain hemisphere, and that impacted me, having done some work specifically in areas of learning about shame and vulnerability and intimacy and dependency and love and interpersonal relating and all of those, and psychology and neuroscience and affect theory. And his speech, his talk really resonated with me because he talks about, in a way, how, and Esther Perel as well talks about the left and right brain. He talks about the left brain being, it closes down to a certainty. So the left brain is that routinizing part of our mind, that it's the knowing, thinking mind, the cognitive space that wants consistency and continually and consistently closes down to certainty. And then he talked about the right brain, or the body brain, as I call it, and the right brain hemisphere, which he's kind of one of those rebel maverick scientists who studied this for years and was kind of cast out from the psychological community because his ideas were seen to be crazy and nuts and against the norm. And I love people like that. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how the right brain opens up to possibilities, and it's analogous, and it wants adventure and desire. And I think that speaks to how the right brain, the body brain, tends to the entire organism, and it's not the thinking brain. Because too many times we try and think our way out of situations and problems, and we can close down to certainties continually. But how do we keep this body brain that tends to the organism? How do we pay attention to what the body's trying to tell us with the felt senses and soma significance and moving meditation and all of those things that the woo-woo stuff I adore and love and are so important, arguably not just as important, more important, because that will help us self-regulate well-being internally. And we have tools that are at our disposal that don't require us spending money to help regulate our wellness or our mind wellness. We talk about mindfulness sometimes. I don't align with that. Filling the mind is with what? What are we filling the mind with? Mind wellness. We want to be well in the mind. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I haven't talked much about the woo-woo through my work, but that's certainly just as important, if not more important, is understanding one's own body, one's own behavior patterns, one's own character traits, how one moves through the world and further extends presence, because that's really what we're all trying to do, is further extend our presence.
Yeah, and I think if you spend a lot of time in that area, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get so like vindictive and maniacal when you're in these transactions. Like if you're in the middle of a divorce, if you've put in that work to yourself and you find yourself like, whether it's like spiritually or you just have a meditation practice, you just like have this sense of like being that's more than, it's going to be a lot harder to reside in that place of like anger. So I think that's where a lot of it goes wrong, right? Is like someone did something wrong and now it's like me versus him, and there's only one victor in this and no one's thinking about the kids. It's just like the two parents going at it, and then you have the people in the crowd, like the stands, which are your attorneys that are just like egging both parties on. So it's like you have to kind of be predispositioned to not react. So like with your emotions in a negative way, so that you can just kind of accept what is your new situation and amicably divorce, if that's even possible. I know some people have had good divorces, but more often than not, you hear of these like horror stories. So it's like, how do you get to a place where you're sound enough that if this does happen, because right now I think the divorce rate's like 50%, right? It's pretty high.
It's higher than that. And
Higher than that.
yeah, and the astonishing, and I think it is possible to do it amicably, but it's rare and it's exceedingly rare. And I would say impossible to do within the system without it at least costing a lot of money. Is one of the areas that I've been looking at is false allegations of domestic violence. And I think it's upwards of 82% of allegations of domestic abuse and domestic violence allegations are false. Now, if you think about that, if you actually sit and think about that, and then you think about the device that our society has to actually immediately tend to that, if law enforcement is dispatched to a situation, a call of domestic violence, what do those police officers do in that particular situation? They can't arrest anyone unless they have evidence of a crime. There's the presumption of innocence. So they can detain someone. Usually it's the father or the man who's detained and removed from the family home. Then what I call the silver bullet of family law is used, which is the restraining order, the TRO or the DVRO or the EPO, the temporary restraining order, emergency protection order. And upwards of 80% of this is based on a false allegation. So we have weaponized women to be able to completely ruin men in those particular situations, using law enforcement, using the system that's now psychologically conditioned in many regards to believe that all men are bad and fathers are bad and dad beat dads rather than dad broke dads. That's a whole other subject. And of course, we're not going to talk about it. Even me saying it now with you, I can just hear people say, women in danger need to be protected. It is wrong, but the women and the people and men sometimes, but mainly women, the mothers and women who are calling in false allegations of domestic violence are an affront to the real victims of domestic violence. And that's abhorrent. It's disgusting. And I don't know any other way to put it. I don't like to be kind of hyperbolic with my rhetoric, but it's despicable. The people, that amount of people. And you see, when we then find out, we look at the two main lobbying groups who don't want any of the laws to change in family law. Of course, we understand that the divorce lawyer industry lobbying group is one, and we get why, because it's a huge money-making industry. But the other one is domestic violence support groups for women. Who get their major amounts of funding, millions and millions of dollars, for ramping up the statistics that all men are violent, and they focus on the worst case scenarios. And there are violent men out there. There are some horrible, horrific situations. But they want the status quo rather than the law to change, to afford a more equitable playing field, to allow our children, boys and girls, to have fathers in their lives. And that's really tragic that we have people like that. Fighting back to the point we talked about originally, I think there's this rabid strain of not true equality feminism, but radical third or fourth wave feminists, if you want to call it that, who really just hate men and don't want women to be mothers. Maybe they don't value the matriarch. Maybe they see all women going out into the workspace and being successful and credentialing. And I think there is a tremendous value in, there are some amazing women I know who are mothers who work tirelessly at home at making sense of homes and making them run like clockwork. And we need to value that a little bit more, I think.
I think so too. It's almost, nowadays, it's almost shameful if you say that you're a stay-at-home mom. They're like, oh, well, you just gave up on yourself. And you're like, it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, I work from home, so I wouldn't say I'm a stay-at-home mom because I have other businesses, but I have the luxury of being able to do most of my stuff like in the house. And it's hard. Like we have help. We have help most of the week, and it's still really difficult. So to kind of like write these women off and say that they took an easy way out, I think is very misguided. And I think those women that are the radical feminists, and it seems that their agenda is to get more women to say that they're not going to be a mom or they're not going to get married, and they're going to live this very ambitious career life. I think there's a lot of fear there, something inside of them, because you wouldn't be so aggressive with it and you wouldn't be pushing that ideology onto other people if there wasn't something unchecked within yourself, right? Because if you're at peace with your decision, you don't react that way. Like, you react that way if there's something like undiscovered, if you will. I don't know if I'm wording it right, but yeah, I think there's a lot of fear when you see like those very angry feminists. And I think when you tell women that they can't be or shouldn't be moms and that they shouldn't be wives, this is going to probably get me into trouble, but I think you're taking away purpose. Yeah, I think you're taking away purpose from women. And like, we're biologically wired to, and this is for men and women, to want to be married, to want to have like a committed relationship, right? Like, I want like security from that saber-toothed tiger, and this man wants to be able to procreate. Like, it's mutually beneficial, right? And we as women are nurturing, like we are predispositioned to be the caregivers. And when you start taking these things that for like hundreds of thousands of years we have been wired to do and saying not anymore, you lose purpose. And I think that's why you see so many women that are depressed and not happy in these careers that they thought they wanted, right? Like, you see, who was it? I want to say it was the creator of Sex and the City, and she threw herself into her work, and she's obviously wildly successful, but she did an article, and I think she's 60 now, saying that she regrets not having a family. She has all of this wealth, all of this fame, and the one thing that she was told she didn't need is the thing that she now can't have. You can't go back in time, right? Like, we're not that far with science. You can't get pregnant at 60, or at least successfully, really. So again, I think it's going to piss some people off, but I do think when you tell people that being a mom isn't important or being a wife isn't important, you lose purpose.
Yeah. And I think, they're good points. I think, everyone's individual situation is different. Mm-hmm. And yes, there is that kind of archetypal drive and the stereotypical man, woman, hunter gatherer, but there are things that do make sense, that are we do carry with us. And if a woman, if an individual woman wants to work and dedicate herself to a career, go for it. Mm-hmm. And if an individual man wants to stay at home and be a stay-at-home dad, great, go for it. What I'm saying is, let's not vilify, or let's not forget that one of the greatest, I would say, one of the greatest jobs on earth is to be a parent, and that's a full-time job. And when I say that, I mean, even at work, you're not going to not think about the well-being of your kids. If there's an issue with school or a call comes in, it's going to interrupt the meeting. And the home, I think over here in America, it's called a homemaker. Mm-hmm. A homemaker. What I mean, that's a meaningful role, if you will, even if we're not allowed to call it a job by the speech police these days. And let's champion more of that. And if it weren't for those, look, I mean, when I was married, my wife, I would say, I wanted her to stay at home. I'm honest. I wanted her to have more quality time with the kids. She wanted to go out and work. And although I didn't want her to go out and work, I supported her in that decision. We had a conversation. I said, you know what, I'm behind you. If that's what you want to do, great. I wanted to bring each day, I think that family dinner, family mealtime is important as much as possible. She wasn't interested in that. She didn't like coming together for family. I'm like, well, the breaking bread, the coming together at least once a day. If you can't do it at breakfast or lunch because of time commitments and schedule, let's try it for dinner. And in England, we have a tradition of Sunday roast dinner where the mm-hmm. family together on a Sunday and we'll all have a nice bang up Sunday roast dinner, which is yummy. And I can still smell my mum's gravy and crispy roast potatoes right now. But however someone wants to live their life, and however your union is made and two people decide to move forward, I think there has to be a little flexibility, but you can look back and go, oh gosh, what was all... I remember a study about, they interviewed many very wealthy people at the end of their life. And, you know, to your point about the lady who, you know, was the showrunner of Creative Sex and the City, many people thought the same. Was, you know, I wish I'd spent more time with my kids. I wish I'd been with my family more. I wish I'd nurtured my relationships within my family and my friends, and really found a way to enjoy what I had, rather than making more of the money and wealth and growing and all the rest of that, the portfolio of assets. There's something that we all have in equal value, and that's the ability to connect and positive and share a little bit of love and intimacy. I mean, I think you talked recently about intimacy, knowing and being known. How can I be more known by another, and how can I know myself more? And only if I know myself, I think Socrates said, know thyself. Can I first aid thyself, get better known by myself? Can I really be known by another? And that speaks to love. You know, we can be with someone for decades and decades and physically close to them and so emotionally distant we can feel from them, that it can be excruciatingly painful, psychologically speaking. And particularly when people are carrying trauma, and particularly when our younger generations of kids, you and I, Candice, have been kids, and we still have our kid versions of ourselves that we remember at times. And I think what a wonderful journey that you're on with a 1-year-old, to start out that amazing journey of, I think one of the hardest parts of probably the primary task of being a parent is to nurture, because those kids are dependent on us for their needs, you know, housing, clothing, food, but how we separate. And it's as much the separation eventually with our children, how that they can be fully self-actualized, fully self-reliant individuals who have their own agency. And the bond that one has with our kids will never be broken. The bond with a parent can never be broken. It can be torn somewhat. And I think it begins and ends with how we repair that tear up here in the brain, of that trauma from our youth.
Oh man, that was so beautiful. Yeah, that was really great. I think you showed the importance when you brought up like you still can taste your mom's like or crispy potatoes and gravy. Like mealtime is so important, and these tiny moments that you dedicate to your family together are so important, and you don't know which ones are going to stick forever as we grow older, right? Like these little parenting moments. And I mean, I still have some with my dad, even though I haven't spoken to him in, you know, well over a decade. The divorce thing ended up kind of rippling down to the kids, and the kids were the ones that suffered the consequence of that, which I think is, you know, that's pretty normal, unfortunately. But you don't realize how important these little moments are. So I think it's really important to try to strive for balance. I think it's like a Stoic quote, or that's like, balance is always striving for balance. It's never actually attaining balance. So I think it's important that you don't underestimate the little moments that you have, and that for everyone listening, that you're constantly doing the work internally. So when these like big volatile moments do happen in some area of your life, then you can act in a respectful way, in a respectable way, and not look back and be like, ooh, I wish I didn't do that. I wish that I had handled that with more grace, so that we can start treating each other with more love and respect, even when we disagree, even when we're ending a relationship, and being able to take the negativity out of it.
Yeah, I think there's something I like to say: no one is to blame, no one is at fault. I don't like those two words, fault and blame. No one is to blame, no one is at fault. It's everyone's responsibility. And to your point about the gravy and the sensed memory, and those small pockets of memories. I remember reading, I think it's Clay Routledge, who's a professor, professional scientist at, I think, it's a university in North Dakota, but he talks about nostalgic savoring and being as a human being of undisputed origin, how are nostalgic memories created? So if we consider savoring as one process involved in the genesis of nostalgia and our remembering, whereas nostalgia refers to an emotional reflection upon past experiences, savoring is a process in which individuals deeply attend to and consciously capture a present experience for subsequent reflection. Thus, having savored an experience, we may increase the likelihood that it will later be reflected upon nostalgically and positively nostalgically. And that fascinates me in terms of when I look at feelings and emotions and memories. I often say, emotions are feelings with memories attached. And by that, I mean, feelings don't come up in the present. Emotions come up in the present based on feelings outside of consciousness that have emotional residue that catches up to us with memories from the past. So moments, scripts, that situation you remembered, mine with the gravy. I can think about unwrapping a Christmas gift one year and the sound of the crackling wrapping paper and the excitement and the smell of the gift and the box. And it immediately transports me back to that time. And that can be incredibly positive and powerful. And it can also be extremely negative. If I'm yelled at when I'm 8 years old for not knowing how to tie my shoelaces, and we're going to be late, we're going to be late, and then 40, 30, 20 years later, my boss is yelling at me because I haven't got the paperwork in quickly enough. And so that feeling with the memory attached from that 7-year-old, 8-year-old time can come up when I'm 38. And the emotions come up in the present based on the feelings attached to the memory from the past. So I'm fascinated by all what you would call, and I love the word woo-woo, so I'm just going to keep all of that, which is the mystery of my story, his story, her story, our story, and how we can maybe rewrite some of those worse memories and experiences, not into positive ones, but maybe we can write them less traumatic and less dramatic and less horrific, so that we can become better sense makers and a little bit more enlightened as to our personal stories. Yeah.
Well, I love the work that you're doing. I can't wait for your book to come out. Do you want to tell the listeners anything that you're working on, how they can follow you, how they can support you, and any ventures that are on their way?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, right now the show, The Respondent, is a video podcast series, a multimedia conversation on modern masculinity. And that resides on YouTube. And I do live stream simulcasts, which go out on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. realgregellis.com is the current website where most of the content is stored. The book will be out later this year, we're about to set the exact date, but I'm thinking it's going to be in about 4 months' time, but stay tuned. You can sign up for notifications about the book at my website, realgregellis.com. TheRespondent.com, which is named after the show and the book, that will be going live in 2 to 3 weeks' time. And that will be the main repository for all of the information to do with the video podcast, to do with the book, the people who are involved in the book, of which there are some really amazing people, which I'm super excited about to announce. And it'll be a place as well, I think, a hub for people to come and learn and get more information and get involved in the conversation and discussion. And we kind of have a growing movement of people right now. There are people coming on board that have been trying to change this policy, this law for a long time, and they've been reaching out, as well as other supporters. So if people want to get involved, they can reach out as well. The email is hello@monkeytoes.me. Let us know what you're particularly interested in helping with and what your skill set might be. And we're very welcome. We would love to hear from people. So yeah, that's really it. Really just ramping up to get the book out, to get more shows out, and keep connecting with marvelous people like yourself, Candice.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. Good luck with everything. You have some exciting stuff on the way.
Thank you very much. I wish you all the best as well. It's been a pleasure talking with you and being on your show.
That's it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have the time, please rate and review, and you can always hit subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. I hope to have you back.